Hello, fictional. Welcome to the crossover What Ifs. Today we are gonna see, what if Naruto was the son of the dragon and got harem? Part 2. If you end up liking this video, please consider subscribe, so without further ado, let's get into the video. In the weeks following the Battle of the Crossroads, word about the Jaguars, and more specifically Naruto single-handedly turning back the vanguard of the Earth Kingdom army and saving not only thousands of lives, but also the campaign in the region. In fact, word spread so quickly that before Naruto had even awoken from his brief comatose state, it had made it as far as the homeland. Stories of the son of the dragon spread throughout the country, and each rumor and tale grew more outlandish and unrealistic than the last. As if the actual deed itself hadn't been enough to win Naruto immediate stardom with the people of the Fire Nation, colonial or otherwise. There was even talk of naming colonies and towns after him. 2 babies had even been named Naruto in his honor. Unfortunately for Naruto, this also meant that his family, or more specifically Ozai and Azula, heard of them all before he had awoken. As time dragged on and she still received no letter from him regarding the event or his own safety, she became furious and then terrified by what that could mean. His previous letters all went into detail about how the war was nothing like what they had been taught and how it was actually a brutal meat grinder, without saying exactly what horrors he was facing. The sick feeling of him being hurt or an eye forbid being killed filled her entire being with an agonizing ache. Ozai on the other hand was pleasantly surprised by his brother's bastard spawn. The boy had managed to bolster morale across the nation, and the movement to emulate him in battle had made his troops all that much more bold, leading to gradual advances across the continent his family had striven to conquer for 3 generations now. Naruto was going to provide a perfect poster boy for his military. The Fire Lord never expected he would be wishing for the boy's safe return to the homeland. However, he had commanded his nephew's unit be transferred to the Fire Nation to officially recuperate their losses and enjoy a period of relief from the front. He had so many more plans for the unit than that though. Such great plans. And oddly enough, the stain that had become known as the son of the dragon would be at the center of it all. While to most people that moniker was as if some kind of connection between Naruto and his father in his youth as the Dragon of the West, the truth was a bit different. The name itself had unsurprisingly started among the 13th Jaguars. Those that survived the battle had lived to see a sight that altered their view of what exactly was possible for a bender. Naruto wasn't the son of the dragon because of his ties to Iroh. He was the son of the dragon because in those moments he appeared like a dragon straight from legends bound in human flesh. The cataclysmic scale of flame he bent to his will and summoned to rain down on his enemies was inhuman. It was with unanimous support among the survivors that Naruto took the place of their fallen captain. Even while he remained unconscious, his troops pushed for him to receive his well-earned rewards. Medals, promotions, pay raises, and not to forget titles and accolades that were heard all across the Fire Nation. To his troops, Naruto, even though he was younger than every single one of them, had become something more. He was like their father now, and as with any family, when their father had been made unconscious and bedridden, they had stuck by his side. A second field hospital had to be constructed because his troops refused to leave his side. Finally, after 2.5 weeks, the young captain opened his eyes again. Somehow still exhausted and sore despite all the time he had spent essentially sleeping. Mulan, now lieutenant, and his other at-hand soldiers rushed to get nurses and water for their commander. Mulan practically shoved the other troops out of the way to remain always at hand for her captain. Even going so far as to hold the glass for him as he drank. He had to be informed of the last moments of the battle, as he had little recollection beyond a certain point. He most assuredly didn't recall roasting an army by his lonesome. She wasn't the only one there. Colonel Raiko had made time in his schedule, despite still being drowned with work at the moment. Especially with all the attention from higher-ups now pointed at those under his command. "How do you feel?" the man asked warmly as he sat beside the bed. "Not excellent, to be honest." Naruto responded with a groan. I imagine not. Then again, that is to be expected after the stunt you pulled. You really are something, I guess. I'm saying this, not as your commander kid but more as a fellow soldier. Well done. You saved a lot of lives doing what you did. Raiko said as he gently patted Naruto's shoulder. "Thank you, sir. I lost a lot of lives too though, so I would rather not dwell on it," Naruto remarked. Raiko and Mulan both grimaced. Naruto might not recall the very end of the fight, but he most definitely remembered the lead up to that. The loss of friends and comrades, people he had fought and bled with on countless occasions hurt. It was a special kind of bond. One of such trust to know they would support him in a fight to the death, and in the end their own trust in him had played a part in them dying. "Naruto, I taught you better than that. We keep the ones we lose with us always," but Raiko scolded. "But we don't dwell on their loss, we," Naruto interrupted only to be interrupted himself. "Recall them fondly," Mulan said with her own scolding look toward Naruto, causing the younger soldier to sigh. Raiko smirked as he looked between the two. Mulan was good for him. A perfect right hand for his own right hand. They'd go far together. I am very pleased to see I will be leaving you in good hands. Raiko said with a grin. Sir? The army is advancing already? Naruto asked, frustrated that he was not with them. Of course, it's been 2 weeks, Captain. The war won't stop over some little fight at a crossroads. We have them on the Blackfoot, so it's time to take advantage. Raiko explained. I see, Naruto said with a frown. Ah, don't pout, boy. Your unit has a special assignment. One from the tip top. Raiko said with his smirk stay in place. What do you mean? Naruto asked. Well, first thing is first, the colonel began. 2 months of leave. What the hell are we supposed to do with 2 full months off? Naruto wondered aloud as the ironclad warship slid into port in the capital. Well, perhaps you could go and visit your cousin, sir. I know you've missed her terribly, plus from the sounds of it we will be swamped when you return from this little vacation. Mulin said from beside him. Oh, and you say that like you won't be coming with me. I know your family lives in the colonies, which can only mean you intend to follow me every step of the way on this hiatus. Naruto smiled over at the woman who simply smiled. She wasn't bothered in the bit that he knew her intentions. She had been trying to make them clear for a while, but she just struggled actually labeling them out loud. You aren't fully recovered. It's only right I remain right beside you. She replied, getting a chuckle and an eye roll from him. We'll see how that goes, Naruto began before trailing off as he saw what, or rather who was sitting at the end of the dock with a furious expression and tapping foot. I forgot to write to Aela when I woke up. He realized. Dread bit down into his very being. This was going to be an unpleasant reunion to some extent. It's too late to turn the ship around, Captain. Face your fate like a man. Mulin teased. And here I was thinking you liked me. Now you seem to want to kill me. Naruto grumbled as the gangplank dropped down. He didn't even get a chance to make his way down it before Aela, followed closely by the Lee and Mai, stormed up the incline. Crewmen and soldiers raced to get out of the steaming little princess's way. She seemed to already have flames crackling in her eyes as she locked onto the image of her beloved cousin and stomped over to him, stopping just in front of him with a mix of a pout and glare on her face. Behind her, Ty Lee did her best to manage her smile and keep from giggling at her best friend's behaviors, while Mai looked entirely too bothered by the antics of the princess. Surprise. Naruto tried getting the girl's glare to sharpen before her eyes watered and she leapt into the boy's arms and tightly hugged him. The pair stayed like that, shocking several of the observers both among their friends and among the various crew members. Suddenly Aela leapt back away from Naruto and hurriedly straightened her clothes out and cleared her face of any traces of the tears she had felt running down it a second ago. Any one of you say a word to anyone about what you just saw and you will be a charred pile of ash by the end of the day. Aela shouted at the people, unintentionally gawking. That snapped them free of their daze. They scrambled to get back to what they were doing and avoid the glare from the eyes of their princess. And you? She said, reaching over and slapping Naruto across the face. Weeks of nothing. I had to find out you were coming here from my father and exactly what was happening by writing to your second in command. Thank you, by the way. Naruto turned to look at Mulin with a betrayed expression, getting a shrug in response. She was worried about you. I kept trying to remind you to write to her, but you always said you would later. Too late now. Mulin said. What is happening right now? Naruto wondered as he saw Mulin and Aela begin hanging up on him while Ty Lee and Mai giggled nearby. Wait, how are you two friends? Naruto blurted out. TCH, we aren't, but you need a full-time minder to keep you from setting yourself on fire. Aela said with narrowed eyes. Damn it, I am a war hero. Parade me around proudly, don't try and pick on me. He griped, getting her expression to crack slightly with a grin. Much more gently she leaned in for a hug, pressing her head tightly against his chest as she did. He was a bit caught off guard but was fast to recover and returned the embrace, tightly pressing his face into her hair. I really missed you, Naruto. Aela whispered so only they could hear. I missed you too. Every moment. Naruto replied. Eventually the pair broke their hug and proper introductions between the two groups could be held, mostly for Mulin's benefit as the others all knew one another. After that they headed off to return to the palace, though Naruto had already begun planning a surprise for Aela. It would just take a couple of days before it really came to fruition. Really? Aela asked in shock. I promised you, didn't I? Naruto asked back. Yes, I just hadn't thought it would happen yet. I thought it wouldn't be for a couple years or something. She said. Well, it won't be like when I was sent but a month on the island learning and taking in everything you can. Plus I want to introduce you to the person that helped me reach my potential there. I think you two will get along. Especially since I plan on her doing the same for you that she did for me. Naruto said as he climbed aboard a smaller ship with the girls in tow. Excellent. Wait, she? Aela asked aloud. The captain was partnered with the chief's niece from the tribe you are going to learn from. From what I understand they stay in pretty good contact. Not as good as you and he do, but still pretty good. Mulan explained. Aela eyed the woman before nodding slightly to show she had heard her. Mulan gave the princess a smile before heading off to rejoin the others. The princess watched as she went, feeling conflicted about the fact she was honestly getting along with Mulan. Under other circumstances she could even easily have seen her become good friends with the older girl. The fact that she was close with Naruto and his second-in-command, not to mention all the undoubtedly near-death experiences that they had survived together, Mulan might be a problem. And again, it could also be the fact that she was feeding too much into gossip around the palace lately. She really was developing a bad habit in that regard. It was just too fun to make up a false rumor and watch it make its way around the staff of the palace though. Especially when it led to a couple of her maids getting into a fight when they thought no one was watching. She doubted Naruto would approve of that new hobby. She just hoped he would buy the excuse that it was a way to train her political skills. Training. That reminded her she was about to be getting awfully close and personal with another girl that was far too close to her cousin's mind for her comfort. She had already seen how girls and women were beginning to look at him now. A young handsome accomplished captain in the army. No worse than that, he was a living legend. The type that would draw all the whores across her land to try and sway Naruto's eye. That was intolerable. Aela had her two friends and Naruto. That was it. Even if she got along with them like Mulan or they were some skilled firebender like this girl on the island evidently was, Aela would need to make sure they knew their place. Or that they knew her and Naruto's place. Too bad that she wasn't even certain of their places. Unlike practically everything else in her life, she couldn't say for sure what she wanted from the blonde boy. He had filled so many important roles in her life, she often felt like she wouldn't even be the same person if it wasn't for his involvement. Aela. Naruto called. The girl bit at her lip as the thoughts continued to spin in her head. She still wasn't sure, but right now she intended to focus on growing her own skills, especially that of firebending. That meant she needed to simply keep those lesser girls at a good length from him until she knew what she was after with him. The princess restored a regal posture and predatory expression that was considered the trademark of the royal family before climbing onto the ship alongside the rest of their group. Like everything else, she planned to take on his challenge aggressively and tactically. It hadn't failed her in her other challenges faced so far in her life. The journey to the island of Totek was short. A couple of days. Still Aela and Naruto had made the most of that time. Mulan, Mai, and even to a smaller extent Helghy had all felt like extra wheels as the two royals practically revolved around one another. Aela had even been sleeping beside the young war hero. She seemed so much happier than she had for the last year as long as she could remain by his side. Naruto too seemed to be relieved, actually at peace. At least more than Mulan had ever seen. They're something else, aren't they? Helghy asked Mulan as Naruto and Aela sparred on the deck of the ship. I always knew Naruto was an amazing warrior and bender, but seeing the two of them together I wouldn't be surprised if she one day earned a dragon moniker just like him. Mulan commented. Yeah, their auras are just beautiful. Every time I'm around them I just want to hold on to them and go along for the ride. When they are together though. It's indescribable. I just want to be a part of it. Helghy said softly as she stared down at the two benders. Mulan eyed the younger girl from the side. She was odd, but it was clear she was committed to both Naruto and Aela. That made her alright in her book. Plus her bubbly personality was sweet and cute honestly. It was impossible to dislike her. Do you know what to expect when we dock? Helghy asked. From what I have been told by Naruto, the island is almost completely overrun by jungle. The Sun Warriors have a large ruined city near the center of the island. They have booby-trapped to act as a test for firebenders seeking them out. It seems like a big waste of time to me when they could just test the benders in person, but benders have always seemed a bit too caught up with traditions and style. Mulan said. Helghy giggled at the older girl's words. She nodded though. You should see Aela in the morning, she is so particular about her clothes and hair and everything else. She looks incredible though when she is done. Naruto isn't that bad, but even while on campaign he went out of his way to make himself look good. The perfect balance of gritty and refined. Mulan said. Sounds like him. Helghy said with a smile. Too bad neither would function right without us there to hold them together. Mulan suddenly said, causing the Lee to look at her. Don't believe me? Mulan asked. It's not that, just I mean what do I do for Aela that is really all that important? She wondered, a bit sadly. That's just it. You are there. You think Naruto and Aela can hold it together like they do alone. They are so tightly wound that if one thing is out of balance and they fall apart. That's why they need us. We're like their right hands. If they could always be around one another they would be fine. I have figured that much out. But they can't be, so they need us to act like stopgaps. Mulan explained. Helghy seemed to be taking in what the other girl said, only for both to jump in surprise by the sudden appearance of the smiling Naruto and grinning Aela. Not quite. You two are a lot more important than you give yourself a credit for. Aela and I are like partners, but you two are just as important. Even if we were together all the time we would need you. Naruto said as he pulled himself the rest of the way onto the observation platform. Naruto is right. Aela said as she wrapped her arms around Helghy from behind. You two are our closest friends. You know me better than anyone else in the world, Helghy. Naruto led Mulin away while Helghy pressed herself into the brief embrace from the princess. Her heart sank to be told such things by them. It was amazing. She wanted to stay with the royal pair forever. Even if just to watch what they would do with the world. After docking the ship, the group of teens ordered the crew to remain behind as they began their trek into the jungle. The island was humid but not as bad as they had expected. It was slightly more damp than the home island of the Fire Nation, but not any hotter. The girls could easily see themselves taking a vacation here. So the Sun Warriors will know to come get us when we reach the ruins? Aela asked. Not exactly. They're watching us from the jungle already. Naruto explained. What? Helghy asked in surprise. I can't pick their exact positions out, but they are there just like he said. Mulin confirmed as her narrowed eyes scanned the trees. Relax, all of you. It's just protocol. When we reach our destination, Chell will meet us. Naruto explained. That didn't truly relax the girls, now that they knew strangers were watching them. Still, Naruto seemed confident and certain of their situation, so they followed his lead. It didn't take all that long to reach the ruins just as they had planned. Unlike most groups who took this path and sought out the native Sun Warrior tribes of the island, there was a welcoming party waiting for them. The chief was a large rotund man. He reminded Aela of her uncle Iroh, perhaps younger and less aloof in nature. Beside him, a thin scowling older man and an attractive young woman stood on either side. It wasn't hard for Aela to figure out this was the mysterious Chell she had been hearing about from Naruto. For the first time she felt honestly jealous of another's appearance. This Chell was around Mulin's age, but unlike Mulin, who was attractive but hardened like a soldier should be, this Chell was something else entirely. Dark tanned skin that looked smooth and soft to the touch with the most curvaceous body she had seen. Chell most definitely was not chubby in any measure of the word. Her physique was easy to pick out, likely earned through arduous bending training. It didn't help that her attire consisted of some jewelry and a pair of strategically placed strips of fabric that concealed her breasts and crotch just barely. Judging by the smirk and way she rolled her hips as she approached Naruto to welcome him with a very tight hug, she knew just how attractive she was too. Aela decided right then that unlike with Mulin, she was not about to get along with this woman. Chell seemed of the same mind as she smirked at her and approached her. So you are the little princess Naruto told me about. I can imagine you will be something when you are all grown up. The woman said sweetly. Sickeningly so. And you're Chell, he was just telling me about for the first time on the trip here. Aela said with a snake-like smile, causing Chell's smirk to twitch. Well, he does like to play important things close to his chest. Chell commented. Oh, sure of course. Aela replied, her grin spreading. That grin fell when she noticed Chell's own smile spread broad once again. I am going to enjoy teaching you one-on-one for the next month or so. She laughed. I am sure you will. Aela scowled as the woman introduced herself to the other girls present. As Naruto and the chief caught up, Mulin close at hand should her captain need her, Chell decided they shouldn't waste any time since they didn't have long together. Rounding up all three of the other girls despite my protesting that she was not a bender, Chell set them on the training course that her tribe used to train its warriors. One she had been using since childhood. The ruins, once the ancient home to all the Sun Warrior tribes on the island, had at some point become considered a sacred site that none would permanently live in. Over time it became a trap for foolish interlopers looking to abuse the knowledge of the tribes. It had another use though. A training ground, one for conditioning and advancing Sun Warrior hopefuls into not only the physical body, but also the mental state that was required of such fighters. In short, it was hellish training, especially for the three girls who had just hiked in from the coast of the island. They weren't exactly ready for such rough treatment so early, but Aela wasn't about to back down, and if she wasn't, neither were Mai and Helghy. Naruto watched from the top of the pyramid alongside Chief Kanto, Priest Sekal, and Mulin as the girls took on the gauntlet that was the ancient ruins. This was a sort of midterm exam. A test to see how far they had come from their first time taking on the course. As with their first time, Chell ran along a secondary path activating traps and targets for the girls to overcome and eliminate, and even occasionally throwing in a blast of fire to keep them off balance. Their first time through, all three had managed to impress Chell and the other Sun Warriors. Naruto had rubbed it in with an endless stream of I told you so's. He was proud of them, especially Aela. Getting the approval of the Sun Warriors was hard and they were already quickly becoming welcomed. Perhaps his vouching for them helped to an extent, but when it came to the tribes of Totek, action always spoke louder than words. It was part of their identity and the core belief for their bending. Thankfully, his own involvement with Aela in the past had allowed Naruto to keep Aela from using her anger and hatred as fuel for her bending like so many that he knew. She wasn't to the point he knew she could reach though. Hopefully her time under the tutelage of Chell would lead her to breaking through that final obstacle like it had for him. Then again he supposed it wasn't truly Chell, but the other teachers on the island that had bridged that gap for him. He had confidence that in the end that wouldn't matter too much and they, would all come out the end of the month different than they had been at the start. He continued to watch with pride as Aela ran along near vertical surfaces and hopped across narrow platforms with agility few in the world possessed. Ty Lee was close behind, making the agility and acrobatic sections of the test look like a game. Mai struggled the most out of the three, which was saying something as she moved easily, her ever-present stoic relaxed expression clear on her face. As they raced up the stairs to the top of the pyramid where Naruto and the others stood, Aela grinned broadly. She still was not overly fond of the Sun Warrior woman, but Chell most definitely had gained her respect. Over the several weeks of training and sparring, Chell had proven to be someone that could go toe-to-toe with Aela, which the princess had found to be increasingly rare. The only ones that really gave her a challenge were her father, Naruto, and a small portion of her father's commandos that he personally trained with. Most of her training was essentially limited to forms and target practice, and if she sparred she rarely kept the opponent long after she defeated them, which was annoying. The Sun Warriors were truly pushing her though, really making her work for her advancement in the art of firebending. That didn't even include the new forms and other additional knowledge she was learning. It was almost like learning firebending for a second time. At all in less than a month of training. No wonder her cousin was so impressive after living here among the tribes of Totek for 2 years. That was something she wasn't sure she could do. There was another element to the firebending here. A spiritual one. One that Naruto and Chell seemed to have mastered. One that Naruto occasionally mentioned had mastered his own father rather than the other way around. It remained just beyond her comprehension. As if she was on the cusp of an epiphany, but it remained just beyond her grasp. The thought aided her, she knew it was there, could see she was close by the actions of Naruto and Chell, but still it eluded her. That knowledge bittered her new personal record of completing the course as she caught her breath while her cousin congratulated her and her friends. "Well done girls," Chell said as she approached. "I have to say I am impressed, but also admit I may have missed you. You see, this isn't a midterm test. I didn't need to see your growth, you all did. Still, this test is the shifting point of your time here. Mai, Ty Lee, you both will continue your martial training. Aela, you will be coming with me." Aela shared a brief glance with her friends but noticed the look of even greater pride in Naruto's eyes. That alone drove her to quickly move after Chell. Whatever this was, she would be sure to master it quickly so that she could show him she wasn't far behind his level. Chell led Aela into the heart of the ruins. It wasn't a comfortable journey, as much of it was spent avoiding traps and obstacles as had been present in the training course Aela and the other girls had run just a while ago. The destination they were bound for deserved as much protection though. While there were many sacred sites across the island for the various tribes, few truly compared to the one that they were headed for now. You should consider yourself very lucky. Not even Naruto was brought here before spending 6 months with my tribe. Chell called back to Aela as she led the way. "So I am just that good then?" Aela asked with a beepy smirk. "Hardly, in truth I argued that you are not ready. It was only because of Naruto and the fact you will only be here a short time that you are being pushed into this training." Chell seemed offended by the idea of simply calling what they were doing training. Aela scowled at the woman's words. She was so used to being the best, even as a princess, always earning her place at the top. Whether through honest means and hard work or conniving manipulation. Either way, she always earned that top-marked spot. Dear Chell was demeaning her, telling her that she didn't deserve it this time. It had only been by the insistence of Naruto that it was happening at all. It infuriated the princess, but she kept her sharp tongue under control. Something that was only possible after several years of practice doing so in the capital. The Totek woman smirked at the fiery look in Aela's eyes. That was good. Let the princess believe she disparaged her, and the girl would work even harder to accomplish what was placed before her. She normally would have taken a healthier approach to this portion of the training, as she herself had been taught. But the time constraints though, Chell doubted the traditional methods wouldn't produce results fast enough. Honestly, she doubted they would have been very effective with Aela in the first place. Naruto had struggled despite his prodigious nature for the single reason that the method ran counter to what his personality dictated was natural for him. In the end he found a workaround. It had taken time, but he created a hybridized variant of the Sun Warrior styles that fit him to a T. Aela was a prodigy in her own right, but she simply didn't have 2 years to formulate her own style of combat. So they would be slapping one together for her that she would have to perfect on her own. At least that was the hope. There were two major hurdles to overcome before that. "We're here," Chell stated as they came to a cavernous chamber within the ruins. At its center a low circular wall sat with an intimate mural painted across its inner side. "Alright, now do you wish to tell me what we are doing, or am I just supposed to feel something?" Aela asked with arms crossed over her chest and a clearly aggravated expression on her face. "What?" Chell asked. "Am I just supposed to feel what to do? That seems like it would fit with all the tribal mysticism you people use," the princess answered. "Have we had any sort of tribal mysticism or whatever since you began your training?" Chell asked. "Well, no, which kind of surprised me at first, but I figure this is where it begins," Axela said. Chell placed a hand on her hip and rose an eyebrow at the younger girl. It was very clear she was judging the princess for her words. She would have very much liked to rough her up right about then, but she just wanted to get started and get it over with. "Just follow the directions painted onto the wall, royal brat," Chell said in anger. "Whatever." Aela huffed as she got into position. Slowly she began working through the forms directed on the wall. She got the stances down easily enough and soon she was speeding through the order of them like a practiced user. "What is this, a dance?" she asked aloud, realizing that it seemed less like a bending form and more like a traditional dance. Still she could feel her Kai flowing more cleanly and powerfully than she had ever felt before. Like a limb that had fallen asleep and was suddenly being used again. "It is one of the first firebending forms. But it is called Dance of the Sun Dragon," Chell replied as she took the opposite position and both of them ran through the forms together. Eventually they came together at the end, connecting fists. "Again," Chell commanded. Aela nodded. "It wasn't perfect yet. You are in mourning, Naruto. It is only natural that you feel so bitter. The war no doubt feels senseless after being fought for so long. Allow yourself time to heal, it is the only way the loss of your subordinates and friends will not hamper you in the long run," the Totek chieftain advised. "I wish I could. My leave will be over rather soon though. Besides, it isn't the first time I've lost soldiers in battle," Naruto replied as he sat across from the chief. "Never those so close to you or in such numbers though. Your uncle wishes to break or kill you. You must not let that happen," the priest said with a deep scowl. "He is right. You must care for yourself as well. You cannot protect your subordinates or the princess if you are too weakened by previous conflicts," the chief reminded. "I know, but one does not disobey orders in the Fire Nation. Especially those given by the Fire Lord himself," Naruto replied. The older men sighed. It was true. Even they were subject to the whims of the Fire Lord, despite how little presence he truly held with the Sun Warriors. "Your time here draws to a close soon. Your princess has made astounding progress, just as you said she would, but still," the chief stated. "It's incomplete. I know, and she is still unbalanced. Her firebending is powerful, but only fueled by her rage and ambition. With my time taken up entirely by the military I can't train her," Naruto commented. "Plateaued progress I'm bending, the machinations of her father, apathy of her mother and brother, and disgust from her uncle you and her friends are all she has to stop herself from spinning out. The fact she has not already is a testament not only to her own fortitude but also your patience and the respect you draw from her," the priest commented. "It's not enough though. That's why I wish to ask for a favor. I beg you to give Chell over to Aela's service. An older, more mature influence, especially from a talented bender like her, will help. I know it will," Naruto pleaded with the chief. "You need not even ask. I was going to suggest something similar. I have no doubt after a few years with Chell, we will see a different Aela. A stronger one as well," the chief replied. "Thank you. We only have a week before we are to leave again, so I will tell them all tonight." Naruto bowed his head slightly. "Of course. Any idea what they expect from you next?" the priest asked. "We will be rebuilding my company. Beyond that, however, I have to be honest, I have no idea," Naruto explained. "Well, good luck with whatever comes. Hopefully the rebuilding takes some time. You need a long break from the battlefield," the chief commented. "We'll see," Naruto said as he stood and made his way out. He had best get the discussion over with. He knew he would be distracted the next few days with thoughts surrounding his troops and taking official command of them. The leave that the final handful of soldiers that made up the 13th had enjoyed was entirely too short. Naruto himself felt the typical exhausted feeling he had come to accept as normal return full force as he and the last 15 of his subordinates reunited in what would be their barracks over the next few months of training. The young captain felt a mix of pride and heartache looking at his surviving soldiers. They were so few in number, but he was confident in each one of them being some of the hardiest and most loyal men and women in the army. He just wished more of his unit had survived. "Captain. The unit is assembled." The now Lieutenant Mulin sounded off with a smart salute. "Thank you, Lieutenant. At ease everyone." We'll need all the proper stuff later, but right now it's just us. Naruto said and smiled faintly as he watched the force before him relax. I just recently came from a meeting with the Fire Lord himself. He applauds our unit's heroics and Naruto hesitated just enough so the men knew the truth. He mourns our losses. However, the Fire Lord in his grand wisdom has decided to disband the 13th Jaguar Company. Naruto dropped the bomb on his troops, causing their eyes to widen in shock and handful quite literally gasp. Thankfully, I was given the option to choose my officers and non-commissioned officers for the new unit I will be building here at Kaskin Base. You aren't getting rid of me that easily. He said with a chuckle, getting relieved looks and a few grins in return. I won't beat around the bush. This unit we will be building will be special. Most of you are aware of the ideal our great nation strives for. A new balance for our world. One that strengthens not only our people but the entirety of our species and brings it into a new golden age. We fight to end oppressive regimes and ideologies that have held sway over the majority of the world since the dawn of time, and this unit will be the first big step in showing that progress. Naruto passionately explained, dragging his listeners along with him as he spoke. Over the course of this century-long conflict, our own nation has committed deeds considered vile and terrible, but we have also done things to help the people of the world more than any other nation before us. This is what we have all been fighting for, I promise you. It also means that soon this war will end and a new age will be ushered in with us at the forefront. Naruto continued, still the soldiers were confused. What exactly was the plan here? We have been instructed directly from the Fire Lord himself to construct the first mixed unit in the Fire Nation military. Over the years, defectors or conquered citizens have been assimilated into our great nation, turning their backs on their former backward societies. Starting today we will constitute the leadership of the new first mixed company of the Fire Nation army. We will be joined by not only firebenders but also waterbenders and earthbenders that have called the Fire Nation home and sworn themselves to their fatherland's success and prosperity. The troops shifted slightly, but at their captain's words, they nodded along and accepted that despite using the bending of their enemies, these new soldiers would be comrades. The next year will be difficult for us. Training and organizing this unit will be an incredible challenge. There is simply too much bad blood between the nations for it not to spill over into issues within this force. However, I have faith in all of you to do your duty and guide our soldiers into the future that we have all been fighting for so long. Naruto concluded his little briefing speech before handing things over to Mulan. The young woman quickly gave a more detailed rundown on what to expect in the coming days. They were going to be getting an entirely green force of recruits, some from the Boiling River province, a region of the homeland set aside for defected Water Tribe members, mostly descended from those once captured by the raids on the Southern Water Tribe. The few earthbenders joining them all came from the colonies and had been far less forcefully integrated into the Fire Nation than the Water Tribe members. Some even came from mixed Earth Kingdom and Fire Nation families, a growing trend among the colonial cities and provinces. Naruto watched as his officers got serious and worked diligently to familiarize themselves with the training program and organization this new experimental unit would possess. They memorized the more notable recruits and prepared themselves mentally for the challenge of training soldiers for the war they had experienced so far. Naruto hoped that it would be enough. He also prayed that he would be capable of training and leading this force back into the hellish reality of the 100-Year War. From the raised platform overlooking the drill yard of Kaskin Base, Naruto and Mulan watched as their subordinate officers barked out at the new recruits before them. Nearly 200 fresh faces. All of them older than himself but far younger than most of his officers. They are really green. He murmured to Mulan quietly so only she could hear. We have a whole year to whip them into shape. She replied simply. And I guide me. I hope that it's enough. Naruto groaned as he saw several of the recruits have to be physically put into place by their unit leaders. Was I ever that undisciplined? Naruto wondered aloud. I would label you a lot of things, but discipline isn't all that high up on the list. Mulan said with a smirk. Her words were baseless and just a joke. Naruto held himself to a rigid standard, though in this case she meant more his respect for the normal methodology a soldier and officer followed. Looks like they are finishing up. Best to get things on the road. Mulan said to him as Naruto stepped forward to the podium. The audience of troopers slowly silenced themselves as their commander made it clear he intended to speak to them. Naruto had led soldiers already, he was a natural at it, but there was something that unnerved him about so many fresh recruits staring up at him in rapt attention. The blonde cleared his throat for a moment before speaking to his assembled soldiers. Some of you have received only the most basic of training prior to being reassigned here. All of you have been in the army for less than a year. Every single one of you has been specifically chosen due to your testing scores and backgrounds for this unit. None of that matters right now. Right now you are my soldiers. I don't care what you bend or even if you bend at all. As of this moment you are mine. Naruto said evenly, taking time to slowly scan his eyes over the faces of his recruits. Together we will shape the future of this world on the battlefield. First, however, myself and my officers will shape you into the instruments that our country needs to mold that future. Today will be the last time you segregate yourselves based upon your ability to bend and by what element you bend. You will select one among your number, one firebender, one earthbender, one waterbender, and one non-bender. These 4 will be promoted to specialist by me to help unify our force. Any further promotions will only come through hard work and talent. You won't get any special treatment from me. Naruto spoke clearly before nodding to Mulan who, like with his officers a few days prior, took over the ironing out of details with his troops. Naruto himself took a few steps back and watched as the unit was quickly given the opportunity to decide who would, at least temporarily, represent them as specialists. Essentially on par with a corporal in the Fire Nation army without having any true responsibility over a unit. Thankfully the groups already knew one another. The waterbenders had been trained together briefly and mostly in bending in their home province, while the earthbenders had around 2 months of pre-training at one of the colonial bases together before being shipped to Kaskin. The firebenders had come from glowing sands just as Naruto once had, though they had received an expedited program that axed everything considered non-essential for them. Essentially anything not combat related. Lastly, the regular army troops had all come from Shajak training base on the western side of the Fire Nation Central Island. Before long the recruits had selected their leaders from their ranks. The selection was a bit odd. For the non-benders they chose the expected member of their force. Their recruit team leader in basic training, Samok. He was a bit older than most of the others and from a military family, so was more familiar with the way things work than some of the others. He was a good pick and Naruto expected him to earn advancement to at least corporal by the time he was ready to take the unit to the front. The firebender chosen was a bit disappointing but not surprising. His Onura was the 3rd son of a high-ranking Fire Nation noble and commander, but he had been selected for his place as the best among the firebenders. He was a bit arrogant, but his reports also said he was frequently found helping his fellow recruits to accomplish their tasks or better learn their bending arts. With some stress to beat the arrogance out of him, Naruto hoped he would pan out as a good member of the unit and someone his troops could go to for help when they needed it. The earthbenders was where things became strange for Naruto. Or a bit awkward was more accurate. Bihar was easily the oldest among the recruits. In fact, he was older than anyone in the unit and actually older than more than half of the fresh earthbenders combined. The old man was evidently unparalleled in his ability with earthbending though, and he had a proven track record of not only keeping up with, but sometimes outpacing his much younger colleagues. Naruto just hoped that the fact Naruto was not even 17 yet wouldn't cause Bihar to try and test his authority. Insubordination and punishment for it would make what he wanted to achieve so much harder. Finally, the waterbender among the group. The strangest of the choices. At least at first glance. A young girl, only a year older than Naruto, Kita. Well, they all called her Kita, the water tribe of the Boiling River province, tended to have incredibly long names. Kita was evidently selected because she was the daughter of the man appointed chief of the Fire Nation's loyal water tribe. She was a capable bender, but there were others stronger. Her strengths lay more in healing and hand-to-hand combat which surprised Naruto somewhat as the water tribe he had learned of were usually described as either being benders or warriors, rarely both, and even more rarely as women. Then again this was the Boiling Water tribe. They were as aggressive in combat as Fire Nation citizens should be. Following the election of their representatives, Naruto's officers made good on his word. The unit was blended with every platoon being composed of a mix of benders and non-benders, as well as elements. The first platoon, which would be led by Naruto and Mulan directly, was also where the specialists found themselves. Naruto hoped to move most of his more experienced veterans into the other platoons by the end of the training cycle so that he could promote some of the new recruits in his own. Soon training began. Naruto found himself rather disappointed by the forces he had been given to command. Overall, the men and women of his new company were given just the basics of instruction on marching and parade formations. How to clean their uniform and armor and maintain their quarters. The most basic of basics. At least the benders had all received some form of advanced training with their elements. He couldn't imagine the pain in the ass it would have been to try and educate them in their elements when all he knew was firebending. Even then firebending came more as an instinct to him, he struggled to properly teach other firebenders their element too. Well, not all of them. Aela was like he was. She almost instinctively took to firebending. He could teach her rather easily. It was a pity that she wasn't here too. The company fell into a routine. Days were harsh under Naruto's command, and the men and women spent nearly as much training their bodies in grueling marches and runs as they did in familiarizing themselves with the formations and commands they would need to have memorized and be able to respond to instinctively in combat. The runs were especially hard on the recruits, as Naruto insisted they endure overly long distances with all of their gear on. They couldn't complain even when forced to keep the insane pace though. Naruto and his officers were right there beside them, participating in the exact same physically demanding tasks that they demanded the soldiers complete. Naruto was careful to keep the health of his troopers in line though. While running he noticed several of the soldiers were struggling to keep pace. Even those that he could tell were physically more capable than their comrades. He called for a break and let them rest for a bit before slowly making his way through the ranks to talk to as many of his soldiers as he could one-on-one. He soon found 3 issues that were the root cause. The first being rather easy to fix with some help from Specialist Kita and a handful of other waterbenders in the unit. Most of the soldiers had not been taught the proper way to treat themselves for things like blisters or other smaller injuries that if left to continue worsening over time could end their career as soldiers entirely. Thankfully Kita and her fellow waterbenders were able to heal those affected and Naruto himself explained better ways of maintaining the hygiene and care for their feet. Part of the issue remained though. Some of the soldiers found that a handful of the staff operating Kazkan base's supply depot were less inclined to do their duty than they should have been. Some had tried to coerce the recruits into even paying for things that were to be supplied by the army, or in a couple of cases that had been reported to Naruto, only now after investigating it, a few of the female soldiers were being pressured to exchange favors of the sexual kind for basic supplies they needed. Needless to say, Naruto and his officers were furious and stormed the supply unit's barracks with minds filled full of righteous vengeance. Naruto restrained himself from permanently damaging the supply officers, but they were roughed up terribly. That wasn't enough for Naruto though. They wanted to keep his subordinates undersupplied and force them to buy it from them. Naruto was happy to return the favor. The supply officers were effectively robbed, every item in their barracks taken, even the bedding, and in a couple cases the beds themselves. The items were then sold back to them at exorbitant fees. Unless they couldn't pay, then the item was simply given to members of Naruto's own force. The supply officers initially made to complain until Naruto threatened to report their attempts at forcing themselves on his soldiers. Something he was certain that their commander, a General Yalin, a woman who was notorious for cracking down on such acts with her subordinates especially harshly. They quieted down and took their situation on with that. They had no real choice after all. The third issue was the most difficult in remedying though. It wasn't due to poor training in something or easily healed with bending. It wasn't because they were being mistreated or extorted in some way. No, the final major issue plaguing his unit's effectiveness was their mindset. Most considered their force to be little more than a throwaway unit. They believed the words of plenty of the bigots that claimed the mixed unit was doomed to failure and that it was a waste on a massive scale. It was worsened as many of those voices claimed support for the idea of waterbenders and earthbenders being placed into the military but didn't want them mingling with the true Fire Nation soldiers. To solve it, Naruto decided some more bonding was required and so ordered a long mess period one night. It was normal for him and the officers to join their troopers in the mess for mealtime. Naruto believed that distancing themselves from their soldiers even for a meal would be poor for morale. Especially when he was trying to advance the meritocratic traits of his nation more and more through this unit. The night was a bit special though. After sitting and eating and even chatting with his soldiers, Naruto finished his food and let the majority of the hall finish as well before he stood and cleared his throat. The room slowly quieted and turned to see their commander standing before them. Let me start out by saying these last 3 months training with you all has truly opened my eyes to the potential for our nation. You all represent the best of our people, no matter your background you really are the best. You wouldn't be here otherwise. After all, I selected you. Naruto said, getting a few to sit up a bit straighter as he spoke. That being said, I see the potential, but I also see the obstacles in our path. The mindsets that keep us from reaching that peak that I know, in my very soul, that we rightfully deserve to reach. The words of generations of our predecessors weigh all of you down. The beliefs that everything must be a certain way continue to keep you from putting your everything into it because all of you think in the end it's not worth it. Naruto continued, getting his soldiers to avert their eyes slightly in secretive shame at him, hitting the nail on the head. It makes sense, right? All your lives you've been told the things I keep telling you are impossible. Why should my words mean anything? I'm just one man. A bastard. Someone who shouldn't be here commanding you now even. Naruto let that sink in while a few shifted even more uncomfortably. Naruto had their respect, the fact that by their society's standards, he should have been relegated to a hidden blemish on his family name, did not sit very well with them. Here I am though. And here you are, despite being told that you waterbenders are lesser than a firebender, or you earthbenders are simple-minded, or that you non-benders are hardly even people, and even you among the firebenders being told that you were placed into this unit because your career and your life is worthless. You all pretend you don't hear it, but the way you act, I can see it weighing all of you down. So I have to ask you all, why? Naruto asked, lifting his arms up for emphasis. The confused stares he got back from his audience pushed him to continue. Why would you listen to them? Why would you let their words mean anything to you? Why would you let their words be considered more honest than my own, or my officers? You take the words of arrogant and bitter people set in their ways who sit here in the homeland or behind the walls of colonial cities and complain. They complain and they judge and they truly have no real experience outside of hearing the generation before them do the same thing. You take their words to heart, though. Naruto said, getting the listeners before him to nod slowly. Why listen to them? Why not listen to me and your commanders? You are here to be prepared for battle and war. We have seen that war. We have fought those battles. We have faced certain death and fought on, and you think the words of some stuck-up nobodies will cause us to bend to their will? Not a chance. Naruto grinned at his soldiers, and small smirks reflected on many of their faces. The only hang-up here is you. I can't decide this for you. You have to decide for yourselves. Do you want to be here? Do you want to prove all of them wrong for doubting you? It's all I've ever wanted. No, more than that I needed. I am going to prove to everyone who looked down on me and judged me as a blemish on the royal family that I am so much more than they could ever hope to be. Are you going to do it too? Do you have the guts to even try? Naruto asked, raising his voice, almost taunting his men. The murmured response was one he expected but not one he wanted. It doesn't sound like it to me. Naruto barked, and a few of the recruits began to more loudly claim they would. Are you just going to let words dictate your lives? Words that mean nothing? He demanded, and a few recruits were standing now, shouting back at him that they wouldn't. The room as a whole was in agreement. Only you can decide this course for yourself. Tonight there will be no training. Take the extra 3 hours this gives you to think about what I've said and make your decision. Come tomorrow morning, I hope to see you made the brave choice. The right one. Naruto said a bit more peacefully before turning and leaving, closely followed by Mulan as they returned to the commander's quarters. You're just full of speeches lately. Mulan joked. Yeah, well they really need a kick in the ass. We won't get anywhere with this unit if they don't believe in themselves. Naruto said as they stepped into the building. After that, I don't think it will be a problem. She said simply before they both went their separate ways in the building to separate rooms. Mulan hesitated only briefly at her door as she glanced at her commander and smiled faintly. She knew he would achieve his goal here at Kazkan Base. She'd make sure of it. In the weeks following his speech made in the mess hall, the soldiers of the 1st Mixed Company had clearly done as he had asked. They pushed themselves harder, retained more of what they were taught, and generally speaking had a more positive mentality about their placement with the company. Soon leaders among the recruits began to truly show their heads. As expected, those made specialists on the onset quickly rose to prominence and respect among their peers, and not just among those that were their own original batches of trainees. The sight of Specialist Kita taking the initiative to check on not only her own platoon members' conditions but the rest of the company and almost naturally taking a position of leadership among the company healers had a grin on Naruto's face. He expected to make her sergeant by the time they shipped out for the front. The other specialists looked to be at least worthy of being corporal by the time they finished training here at Kazkan. Surprisingly, Izonu, the formerly arrogant firebender, had shaped up properly ever since he had seen the way Naruto and his officers handled the supply situation. While he had little to offer so far as tips for the other benders, his experience surrounding the life and struggle of those in the army made it easy for him to take a leadership role among not just his fellow firebenders but the rest of his platoon as well. Today things were accelerating though. They were moving beyond what Naruto considered as the basics for his unit and into the combat training. More specifically, Naruto and his officers had erected a modular obstacle course that mimicked a village or a battlefield and could be easily altered for practicing different layouts. Each squad was being separated from the rest of the unit and run through the course individually to give them an idea of what to expect. The first 2 times really bolstered their confidence. They easily eliminated the wooden cutout targets and seized their objectives. By the 3rd round though, Naruto decided to shake things up. As first squad moved toward the village, Naruto suddenly descended upon them and threw the sergeant of their squad to the floor, roughly while glaring daggers at the second in command. Your leader was just killed in battle. What do you do? Naruto demanded. The young man stammered for a moment too long and Naruto threw him to the ground as well. You? He snapped, jabbing a finger at the next closest member of the team. They're both dead now, what do you do? Find cover. The recruit bellowed. Then find it, don't just stand there. Naruto roared and the team members scattered into covered positions to avoid pebbles that Naruto began flicking randomly to mimic earthbender attacks. What about your downed comrades? He roared in question toward the frazzled recruits. But they're dead, sir. One of them replied. Are they? I said they were, but did you even check to see if they were? Sergeant, how dead are you? Naruto asked, turning to face the first man he had pushed over. Not very, sir. The sergeant replied, sending a scathing look to the troops under his command. So you're not dead. But you were hit, Sergeant. What does that make you? Naruto asked. I guess wounded, sir. He replied. Wounded, and my men left you on the field of battle alone? Naruto asked, pretending to be shocked and outraged. Looks that way, sir. The sergeant replied. Well, shit, Sergeant, if that happened to me I think I would have to punish them. Naruto said, getting the recruits to pale. I agree, sir, perhaps you have a suggestion. The sergeant asked with a gleam in his eye. I have always loved a good sprint to help me correct my actions. The longer and the faster the better. Naruto said as he scratched at his chin. Good idea, sir, I'll have to make sure they know the weight of their actions and make them perform runs in full gear. The sergeant said as he climbed to his feet. Good on you, Sergeant. Naruto cackled before turning his attention to the second squad, which gulped at the attention they were suddenly receiving. He then turned to look at the full company beside him and spoke loud and clear for all of them to hear. We are going into battle. Your enemy will not stand there like wooden cutouts and let you kill them. They will fight back and some of you will die. However, if I ever find out you left your comrades behind to save your own skin, then I will deal with you personally before I let them have a go at you too. He let that sink in for a moment before signaling Mulan to send the second squad into the course while he disappeared within to wreak havoc on them. For a year Aela found herself being shadowed as well as tutored by the Sun Warrior Chell. The young woman was annoyingly competent and capable. Aela was used to outgrowing any form of teacher she was placed under in record time. Chell seemed to always be advancing just out of her own reach, which was infuriating. The taut woman simply taunted her about it before pushing her into another training cycle that left her exhausted but oddly content. Such a strange feeling. That of being content. Not happy really, she wanted other things. More time spent with Mai and Ty Lee, a chance to visit Naruto again. But she was content. For now. She had her ambitions, of course, she just knew it was not yet time to pursue them openly. Oddly enough, Chell knew this as well and seemed completely supportive of her. It was strange to have such a female role model in her life to help her and iron out what Chell referred to as less than useful personality traits. Aela was never going to be some warm and bubbly girl like Ty Lee was, but in part from her closeness to her friends and support with Naruto, Chell was able to round Aela out as she finished her training for her role as the new crown princess of the Fire Nation. That didn't mean Aela was especially pleased to have Chell around all the time. She was thankful, perhaps, of her presence, but the bond she had with the mockingly curvaceous woman was unique and often a bit raw. Chell was one of a handful of people in the world that could be brutally honest and even negative with her. The only one she hadn't known since her childhood either. No, the two bickered and made snide remarks toward one another more than anything else, but for some reason they also preferred to keep the other nearby. Aela wondered why often enough, but usually came to the conclusion that she was probably a bit mad, all things considered. After all, Chell had even managed to make her confront the reality that her father saw her as nothing but a useful piece in the machine of his ambition, and she still loved him. Aela, snap out of whatever daydream you're having and get back to work. You wanted me to make sure you were studying the more civil side of rule, well, I'm not going to waste my time if you are just going to stare off into space. Chell said after flicking the princess's ear. Aela clicked her teeth but did as Chell said and got back to reviewing the paperwork before her. A large collection of copied military reports for her father. Mostly regarding new recruit numbers and unit deployments into the colonies. One stood out though. The copy in her hand had an envelope pinned to it, confusing her. That is until she read which unit the report was for. It was Naruto's company. The letter was addressed to her as well. Finally he writes. Aela said happily before quickly schooling her features when she noticed the smirk on Chell's face. I suppose you can take a break for a while. Just don't take too long, we aren't working on that new alteration to your form until after we finish this. Chell said as she left to go to wherever it was that Chell went when she wasn't tutoring or minding Aela. The princess rolled her eyes as she blew a lock of her hair out of her face. Still, once the door had clicked closed she scrambled to open the letter as quickly as possible. Naruto had been writing less lately, ostensibly because he said there wasn't anything interesting going on with training his company. It annoyed Aela, and she planned to have words regarding that with him once she saw him again. Only one more year and she would be out there by his side after all. 16. The age they had agreed upon for her to attend the field. Sometimes she was rather angry with herself for allowing him to talk her into agreeing to that. She just couldn't argue with him when he got all passionate and preachy though. When those eyes of his seemed to glow with power and he looked past you at some potential future only he could see. Like he was looking into no. No. She didn't want to think about that right now. Chell always seemed to know when she did, and the woman was incredibly annoying when she was taunting her about her supposed crush. Aela was the crown princess of the Fire Nation, she didn't do crushes. Let's see what you have to say, Naruto. The princess said, pushing her previous thoughts from her mind with a small content smile. Something that was becoming a greater occurrence lately. Aela trailed her eyes across the paper as she read. Her cousin explained to her the final training exercises he had put his unit through. Mock battles pitting platoons against one another and grueling obstacle courses in the steaming bog on the far side of the island from Kazkin base. She giggled freely at his description of Mulan having to pull a pair of recruits out of the muck and getting pulled in herself. The additional note in Mulan's handwriting saying that Naruto had pushed her in and not to let him convince her otherwise brought an even broader smile to her face. The smile slowly faded as she felt the desire to join with him return to her chest. She missed him, Naruto. Chell, Ty Lee, and Mai were fine, they kept her happy, and she did consider them friends. Even Chell, though Ty Lee was recently more than just a friend. It wasn't the same. She missed those days when she was little, spent running around the palace with him. Just enjoying their time together and being little terrors for all the nobles that came to court. Before her mother let slip what she thought of Aela and then disappeared. Before her grandfather died and her father became even more of whatever he truly was. Back before Iroh chose Zuko as a replacement son and she watched part of Naruto break. The thought of Iroh and Zuko was the final straw that shattered her good mood. Thinking of them as they sailed around the world, free to do whatever they wished. Naruto had been right when he called them barely better than deserters. After all, Zuko's banishment was only from the homeland. He was welcome in the colonies and was still recognized as a prince of the Fire Nation. He should have been out there fighting the war alongside their countrymen. It was what Aela would have done. It was what she longed to do. With a sigh she glanced one last time at the last few lines of her letter from Naruto. His company was finished with their training and as of him sending the letter would be shipping out the next day for the small colony of Koyosi, where Naruto would march his troops up to rejoin his old commanding officer near the front lines. Which was good. Over the last year many of the gains the Fire Nation had made, thanks to the rout of the Earth Kingdom forces at the Battle of the Crossroads, had been rendered effectively null and void. Their population was far too large and they just overwhelmed the more vulnerable positions held along the front, pushing it back to within 100 miles of the front that Naruto had been fighting on a year prior. He didn't say it in the letter, but Aela could tell by the way he talked about where they were going that he was frustrated with the upper levels of command that he felt had failed to properly hold the gains his soldiers had died for. She smiled at that. Her Naruto was almost fatherly in his care for his soldiers, despite being younger than all of them. With a final sigh she set the letter aside and got back to work. She wanted to be able to match him whenever she joined him next year, so she needed as much practice with Chell on perfecting her forms as she could get. She needed to fight through this damned paperwork review first though. The first mixed company didn't so much march down the road as it slogged through the thick muck of what was supposed to be a roadway. As Naruto expected, the closer to the front they were the more the situation deteriorated. The muddy roads and eerie silent farms and villages reminded him far too much of his time with the Jaguar Company. What aided Naruto the most though was just how close to the old frontline this position was. After the Battle of the Crossroads had happened they had one for the few properly unified and organized Earth Kingdom armies in a full-blown rout. The Fire Nation had been practically knocking at the doors of Amashu. One of the few true Earth Kingdom strongholds that remained. At least he could appreciate being placed under the leadership of his same old commanding officer. The colonel's career had temporarily stalled out in the face of the string of major defeats the Fire Nation had suffered. Of course the arrogant ass that was General Buying had bumbled them into impossible scenarios, so Raiko had no chance at victory. As Naruto had expected, the man had chosen the lives of his troops over saving face at court. He adored that about the man. It was something Naruto himself strived to apply to his own career. As the company marches into the current encampment garrisoned by Colonel Raiko's force, he couldn't help but feel both disappointed and nostalgic. Nothing had changed. Any boost of morale gained by the rapid advancement recently was gone, since their defeats had forced them so far back. The tents and broken down buildings of the ruined village were Naruto's home away from home though, and after ordering his troops to fall out he, along with his officers and squad leaders, headed toward the farmhouse converted into a headquarters. As he stepped in the young captain smiled at the sight of Raiko once again. The old man looked tired and gray. Literally gray, as his hair both on his head and face had gone a silvery color almost like metal. He was clearly suffering from the stress of the war, but he looked as strong and imposing as ever. "Colonel." Naruto greeted warmly with a salute followed by Mulan and the rest of his subordinates that had accompanied him. "Naruto. At ease. Damn, it's good to see you. Mulan." Raiko said as he nodded in the direction of Naruto's right hand. "Sounds like you've been in need of some support. Sounds like you have a bunch of green recruits. You know what we're about around here. This really isn't the place for them. It will look bad for the first mixed unit in the military to lose most of its number in its first campaign." Raiko said. With all due respect, Colonel, my people are green, but I'm not. Naruto said seriously, causing his commander to stare back at him. No, you're not. The colonel admitted. Raiko's force was currently on rotation away from the real front lines a few more miles inland. It was fine with Naruto. He needed to get his people used to the reality of the Great War anyway. As much as he had tried, no amount of training would properly prepare for the real thing. The current focal point of this region was combat around a bridge that the Fire Nation had hastily constructed during their advance inland. The Earth Kingdom had been smart to destroy as many paths across the waterways during their retreat, but as they pushed the Fire Nation back, they easily rebuilt any bridges themselves. Now however the Fire Nation was essentially making its stand and trying to stop the slow-plodding counter-offensive that their enemy had been using to drive them backward. All but this one metal bridge had already been destroyed, making the fighting around Bridge D3 especially intense. After all, if they lost their foothold on the other side of D3, then they would be forced back onto the other side of the river and likely slowly pushed back to the next waterway, which was unacceptable. As it was, they were already a stone's throw from some of the more isolated Fire Nation colonies, and it was unacceptable that they would be put under threat. Raiko had brought Naruto as well as the other company commanders together to go over the current situation for when they were placed on the front. The figures on the map did not look good for them. Outnumbered was an understatement, and of course the bridgehead was at the base of a valley between two steep hills. The only cover was the remains of a ruined village on the other side of the river. This is awfully familiar. Naruto said as he looked at the diagrams. At least we don't have to paddle across the river this time. Raiko replied as he nodded his head. A lot better first rotation for my people then. What's the plan? Naruto asked. Thought you'd never ask. The rest of our force is slated to rush up to reinforce our troops on the bridgehead. Your force won't be using the bridge. Between your waterbenders and your earthbenders, I want you to come in on the southern flank. If possible, I want you to do it without revealing your position to the enemy so that you can hit their positions from the rear. Raiko explained. Naruto eyed the map. He then turned to look at Kita. She was a sergeant already, the highest ranking of the new recruits. She'd earned her position after saving nearly 10 of her fellow recruits' lives after an accident aboard the ships nearly drowned them. Can our waterbenders get us across unnoticed? He asked. Kita stared at the map and ran the estimates of her people through her head. She was more of a healer in focus, but her training and the weeks since coming to the mainland had expanded her knowledge of bending a bit forcefully. We could walk across the bottom while bending the river over us. It would take a lot out of everyone, and if they lost concentration while doing it, we would be as good as dead. She explained. Naruto eyed the map but slowly began to nod his head. It was a bit risky, however it would put them behind the Earth Kingdom lines without giving them away if they could pull it off. The idea of walking under a river had him suddenly missing the paddle boats he had once used. If you're sure, then tomorrow night your people will move as soon as the sun sets. You'll take as long as you need for your people to rest back up, then attack before sunup. We'll wait for your attack, then join in. Hopefully this will force them off of those hills and allow us to break through again. Raiko commented. Sadly, it's another set of rivers between us and any real progress. Naruto commented, getting a disappointed nod from Raiko. He knew the terrain in these parts all too well by now. It was going to be complicated to retake the land leading up to Amashu, but that was the task they were given. Feed and rest your people as best you can, Naruto. You'll need the energy. Raiko said before dismissing them. The leadership of the first mixed company saluted their commander and headed off toward the large barn that had been converted into a mess hall for the troops present. Our commander is a bit of a character. Kita commented to her captain, waiting to see his reaction. The commanding officer said nothing, but Lieutenant Mulan suddenly turned her head to give the younger soldier a scathing look. Colonel Raikos was our commander during our first tour on the front. He pulled us out of the grave more than once. She said simply. Kita and the other leaders from their force cringed at that. Even those that had been soldiers in Naruto's unit prior to the crossroads hadn't realized how close their two leaders were to the colonel. Fall out and find some chow. I expect everyone to have us a place set up for camp in the next 2 hours. After that I want a general assembly for the company called outside my new quarters. Naruto said simply. Dismissed. Mulan called and the soldiers moved to join their own subordinates in eating. As the soldiers headed off, Naruto continued past the barn toward the remains of what was probably a tool shed at one point. The tarps and short sandbag walls around it made it clear that the building had been converted into a more important job than before. The small sign nailed to the front of the building denotes it as the company's commander quarters. Which meant Naruto and Mulan would be sharing a space. Just like their first time on the front. Privacy was a privilege after all. The two of them thanked the camp workers that brought them their own meals before they settled in and made themselves comfortable on the tiny one-room space. Cozy. Mulan joked. Better than a tent for sure. Naruto commented. That was a fair point. There was just enough room for 2 small army cots and a single desk. It didn't matter though. They wouldn't even have a full 2 days to stay here. At least not if things worked as they planned. The pair quickly ate and changed, ignoring one another as much as possible while they did so. Thankfully for Naruto's teenage heart, Mulan wore tight chest bindings beneath her uniform. He doubted he wouldn't try to sneak a peek if that wasn't the case. She was a beautiful woman after all. Naruto turned to the desk instead and set to work writing a letter to send back home to Aela. Mulan finished dressing and watched her commander at work. A small flutter in her chest at the sight of him looking so peaceful caught her a bit off guard. Her eyes settled on the letter and she frowned just so slightly. A pang of jealousy at the attention her gave the princess even here so far away from her stung at her, but she quickly smothered it. Her captain might not see himself as such, but he was a royal. It was only fitting that his mind be centered on the princess. That being said, she was disappointed that her choice to change at the same time as him hadn't had more of an effect. She had little doubt that her captain would eventually rise to high enough station that the Fire Lord would wish to marry him to Princess Aela. He was an incredibly powerful and talented bender. Aela was just as talented and they were both set to shape the future of their entire world. Mulan was just an army officer in comparison. Yet royals had mistresses, did they not? Fire Lord Aslan was known for it, though he was evidently quite careful not to soar bastards, unlike his elder son Iroh. She could be fine with that situation either way. "Mulan, are you alright? You're staring." Naruto asked as she realized he had stopped writing and was looking at her in confusion. "Just thinking of tomorrow night," she said quickly. "It's going to be tough but better that than our first few battles, right? I just hope the company is ready for what will come. We might get the drop on the Rockheads, but that doesn't mean they are just going to throw in the towel and surrender. There will be bloodshed," Naruto said a bit worriedly. "We prepared them all as best as we could sit. Better than we were. Better than any other new recruit stepping into combat for the first time. Maybe. I just hope it actually counts for something this time," he grumbled before turning back to the letter. Mulan felt the same way in regards to their lost comrades. So much death and all for practically no real change. Still, there was just a feeling inside her gut that told her that someday soon things would be changing very quickly. It was dark. The moon was out, but the cloudy night sky kept most things in the dark as the first mixed company moved into position along the bank of the river. There was quiet murmuring barely audible over the distant rumbling. A few of the recruits wondered if it was thunder. Perhaps a storm was coming in. The veterans knew better. The continuous rumble wasn't coming from the clouds, but rather from the battle being had at the bridgehead. No doubt the Earth Kingdom army was hammering Raiko's men there, trying to force them back or at the least keeping them contained until they built up enough of a force to crush through the defenses. Pass the word along, quietly form into groups, 2 waterbenders per group. They know what we're doing," Naruto ordered in a voice just above a whisper. The murmur changed as junior officers and sergeants quickly passed word along and the men and women under his command shifted into their groups. Soon they were organized, though a few sergeants had to yank a couple soldiers around in the darkness to get them into position. Hida stood at her commander's shoulder along with a slightly older woman who Naruto felt bad at not recalling the name of. It wasn't time to dwell on that though. His group, consisting of his inner circle as well as those that had once been the elected leaders among his recruits, were the first to step into the water. As they advanced, Kita and the other woman began an intricate dance-like bending pattern. Arms waving, hips twisting. In other conditions it would have almost been like the belly dancers he'd heard of populating the desert provinces of the Earth Kingdom. He figured that such a thing would be used for warfare in this conflict. By now he wondered if there was anything that wouldn't be found useful and utilized in the fighting. It was an interesting experience, walking along the bottom of the river. The path was understandably muddy, but it was like the muck of the overused roads they had marched on. More like wet ground after a hard rain. Their boots didn't get sucked down or stuck. That had been something he'd worried would stall their movement, but they made better time than he could have hoped, and before long they were emerging from the river on the other side. He couldn't stop the feral grin that crept onto his features. This was going to be an utter rout for the Earth Kingdom if the plan continued on as smoothly as this. After the entire company had been assembled on the enemy shore, Naruto once more sent a series of whispered orders to organize his soldiers. They reformed into a rough formation with non-benders at the forefront, armed with shields and blades, while the company's firebenders and earthbenders stayed close by to step forward at a moment's notice and assault the enemy. Lastly was the rest of the non-benders and waterbenders. With a silent signal, the group began to move quietly over the hilly terrain toward the rear of their enemy. It would take them a good while to reach the right position at this pace, but it was a relaxed gait that allowed the waterbenders to regain their strength from bending through the river and keep the company overall in pretty decent shape. They wanted to be as rested as possible for the coming assault. It was still quite dark by the time they reached their position. A straight shot with a gentle incline up to the Earth Kingdom positions. They could make out the fires and movement at the hilltop. Naruto ordered a halt though. They weren't exhausted, but still he gave them all a moment to ready themselves for what was about to happen. The time felt simultaneously like it was gone in a flash and like it had drug on for hours. As if the spirits themselves were lending a hand, a fog began to settle over the whole valley. Morning remained a few short hours away, but the humid foggy air felt like it was wrapped around them. Quiet and eerie. Finally Naruto signaled the company to form up and the soldiers followed his command immediately. The young commander looked on at his mostly green company and worried once again about the possibility of this somehow backfiring and getting the entire group trapped on the wrong side of the battle lines. He pushed the thought from his mind and waved the company forward. Muffled orders from lieutenants and sergeants had the force advancing. Slowly at first they plodded across the empty space between themselves and the hill. However, as they advanced their pace began to steadily pick up. The rumbling thumps of footfalls and jingling sound of weapons and armor as they moved began to increase in volume. As it did steadily, the need for silence fell away and a new need to rouse their determination to spill their enemies' blood picked up. It started out as a couple shots here and there, but by the time the company was running full tilt toward the enemy camps they were roaring out in a full-blown charge. Of course this eliminated any real surprise, but the main surprise had been the sudden charge from behind. The complete opposite direction as to where their enemy expected them to be. It made the Earth Kingdom's reaction slow and sloppy. Too slow and sloppy to properly rally their troops as Naruto and his company rapidly closed the distance. Screams and shouts of alarm could barely be heard by the young captain over his own soldiers' war cries. As he began to crest the hill, just a few steps to the right of Mulan as both led the charge, he was already twisting his body into familiar motions that brought forth gouts of flame. The nearly as familiar screams of terror and pain among his targets pushed him onto the next set of enemy soldiers before him. Nearby Mulan drove her weapon through the chest of a stumbling earthbender before Naruto lost sight of her in the rush of bodies. The two sides clashed at the edge of the Earth Kingdom camp. Soon gouts of flame swept over the tents and soldiers alike just as boulders claimed the lives of both sides of the conflict. Blades of water quickly became reddened as they carved up the enemy. Naruto fought harshly and burned his way down a narrow trench line into what appeared like a commander's tent. Inside, a young and clearly high-born nobleman had just finished pulling on his uniform. At the sight of Naruto his eyes widened and his arms instinctively moved into a bending form. He never got further than the initial pose though, as Naruto planted a fist into his face and clamped his hands onto his enemy. Direct heat, channeled from Naruto into his opponent, began causing the young officer's face to steam and warm up as he let out an anguished scream. This wasn't really bending. It was the most basic exercise for a firebender turned up to the most cruel extent. An exercise used to burn leaves and start campfires, used to boil flesh and blood and torch bone. Just as the officer's eyes looked about ready to pop from the heat, Naruto felt himself roughly torn off of the man, slammed into a rock wall that most definitely hadn't been there before. A much larger and older earthbender stormed into the tent. That was when Naruto realized there were two cots inside. "Min? Are you alright?" the man asked, clearly worried about the younger of the two. It wasn't hard for Naruto to figure things out. The two were identical besides the obvious differences in age and size. This man was the true commander of this Earth Kingdom unit, and the man that Naruto had just been cooking alive was clearly his son. Ming, the younger officer, evidently didn't seem to hear his father at all as he simply sobbed in agony. Blackened handprints decorated his once flawless visage, and blood and peeling skin had ruined the rest of the boy's face. He couldn't clutch at his wounds without causing himself even more pain, so instead his hands desperately reached out, blindly grasping at anything and everything. The commander seemed to understand that his son wouldn't be recovering enough for him to speak. He turned back to destroy the firebender that had harmed his child in such a way. Instead he hesitated for a brief moment as he noticed that Naruto was in fact even younger than his own son. It was a fatal mistake. In that brief moment Kita had arrived into the tent and planted a spear of water through his chest and pinned him to the ground. It was brutal but obviously effective as the commander gurgled loudly from the blood and water quickly running into his airway. Kita seemed to freeze up at the sight. Her training had been enough to save Naruto's life, but the dying man before her was dying because of her actions. She snapped out of it and Naruto stood back to his feet and with a twist, engulfed both wounded earthbender in a white-hot fire that lasted nothing more than a second. The charred corpses that remained looked more like huge pieces of firewood than human beings. Kita could hardly believe the damage done to them by what seemed to be such an easy move for her captain to pull off. Was this the end result of all those that had faced him at the Battle of the Crossroads? "Thanks for that, Kita. You saved my ass there, but we are needed outside. This battle is far from over," Naruto said. He turned and left the girl to her thoughts for a moment. She needed to fight down that grief at ending a life. It wouldn't be her last. Naruto rejoined the fight outside. He caught sight of Mulan organizing some of their troops into a battle line. The first company's earthbenders marched ahead, pushing a solid barrier of rock against the faltering earthbenders from the Earth Kingdom. Naruto had expected this kind of scenario and trained his men ruthlessly in combating people of all nations, even of the Fire Nation. In comparison, the earthbenders facing them rarely if ever battled someone of the same element in a serious wartime situation. It made Naruto quite proud of his soldiers. While the earthbenders advanced, Naruto joined in with his firebenders as they launched another assault over the camp and into the defensive lines that the Earth Kingdom forces had taken refuge in. Unfortunately for the defenders, Raiko had also begun his assault upon seeing the flank of the Earth Kingdom positions collapsing. Balls of flames fell upon the trenches and bunkers from both sides, and the Fire Nation took the hill on the smoldering corpses of hundreds of Earth Kingdom soldiers. Having lost the high ground and nearly a third of their force, the organization of the remaining Earth Kingdom forces collapsed, and the battle kicked into an even more brutal and intense storm of chaos. As many Earth Kingdom forces fled and other charged, they were easily cornered and obliterated in small groups by the better discipline and organization of the Fire Nation army. Naruto had reformed his company and begun pursuing the remnants of the Earth Kingdom center into a ruined village that acted as the central headquarters of the enemy force. He could see Kita had regained herself after taking her first life. The older waterbender that had joined his group in crossing the river lay dead nearby her, and the white-haired bender had exacted revenge for her sister-in-arms by separating a score of Earth Kingdom heads from their shoulders. As he had expected, the battle became a complete rout for the Earth Kingdom forces. Only the staunchest and most stubborn of the enemy remained. Weeping traitors. You betray your own people to the Fire Nation for what? A man howled with blood from several wounds running freely. He took on 3 of Naruto's best earthbenders through sheer willpower and rage. They did it for a chance at a better future. Naruto said simply, and he rocketed forward with a burst of flame knocked the man off balance. His soldiers didn't miss the opening their captain had given them. The mouthy soldier was soon little more than pulp from the crushing rocks that smashed into his body. The fighting didn't stop there, and even when the battle itself was truly over, the wounded of the enemy were largely put down. It was a mercy in a way. They didn't have the materials to treat so many, and of course the Fire Nation would look after its own first and foremost. By mid-morning, the last of the Earth Kingdom forces had either fled or been wiped out. Naruto and other officers had gone to report into Colonel Raiko, but had learned that the colonel had been severely wounded in the battle and been taken to a field hospital before being taken farther back for more impressive medical treatment. That had shaken both Naruto and Mulan. Raiko seemed practically invincible to the both of them. To learn he was seriously injured while they had been nowhere close by to help was jarring. Still, they were reassured that with a few short months the bitter veteran commander would be right back where he belonged. The medics had even said he'd been pissed to be getting shipped to the rear just as they made a breakthrough. Naruto had to chuckle at that. It sounded very much like Raiko. Unfortunately, while Raiko was away from the front, command of his unit was handed over to Major Yaren. Someone that hadn't joined their force until after Naruto and his people had been given their leave. He had taken part in the advance of the Fire Nation army as well as its retreats over the last year and was a decent officer in most ways. Except that he was from a very important noble family. One that even claimed some blood ties to the royal family. Yaren already thought poorly of the upstart royal bastard leading the first mixed company, but his bias didn't stop with Naruto alone. The major held firebenders above all else. If anything, that was the one decent thing about Naruto to him. That being said, he despised the idea of Naruto's unit to his very core. He considered non-benders as lesser, but at least he considered them citizens. The way he looked at and acted around the earth and water benders, though, it was like he expected them to leap after him to try and stab him in the back. So for over a month after their first use in battle, the company was stuck doing menial labor and construction jobs. Being put to real use, as Yaren called it. Building roads, fixing bridges, and repairing buildings. Civilian work mostly. Naruto had initially been accepting of it. He wasn't keen on throwing his troops straight into the meat grinder, and it was only temporary until Raiko returned. Sadly, that was proving to be impossible. Yaren seemed intent to make some kind of point of putting Naruto and his troops in their supposed place. Their rations were cut nearly by half quantities to supposedly give the food to more deserving units. Soon after that, the food they did receive began to suffer more and more in quality until it became clear they were getting leftovers and in some cases even spoiled supplies from the rest of the force. Sadly, there wasn't much Naruto could directly do about it. Until Raiko's return, Yaren had absolute control. At least until a higher-ranked officer became involved. As for Naruto, what was the point of having high-profile connections, like say the crown princess herself, if you didn't use them from time to time? All it would take is a simple letter. One he was happy to write home. He wanted to see Aela and her friends in the flesh again anyway. A simple little visit to inspect the troops and put any unruly officers in their place sounded good to him. He knew it would sound good to her too. So this part ends here. Alright, that's it for today's video guys. Let me know in the comments section how was the story, and also don't forget to like, share and subscribe. I will meet you in another video. Bye bye.